Welcome to another episode of Eye On Sullivan, your weekly podcast where we cover the people, places, and events affecting the people of Sullivan County. I am Mike McGuire. I am one of the hosts of this show. I am joined today, as we are each week, by the chairman, Robert Doherty. Robert, good afternoon.
Hey, how are we doing today, Mike?
We are doing great. The snow is on the ground. We're getting ready for the Christmas season, and there's nothing like a white Christmas, and the hope is we'll have a 75-degree and sunny New Year's.
It was quite warm today, a little rainy, and most of the snow is gone now, Mike.
Your kind of weather.
My kind of weather.
It's your kind of
60
weather.
degrees and raining. It's good working weather.
So it's your kind of weather, and it is your season, not necessarily Christmas, but it is budget season.
Oh, I
and
love
today we want
budget
to talk a lot
season.
about budgets.
Love the budget
We've got
season.
a guest with us, which we'll bring in just a few minutes. But before we get going, I happened to notice this morning that Governor Robin Hood
Oh, yeah.
has put out a proposal that since the state did so well in sales tax revenue because of the Bidenomics and the inflation,
Sure.
that crippled much of this country, but did usher in a new administration.
Yeah, luckily.
Normally gets inaugurated on January 20th, but by all indications, I think that he's already operating as the president.
He is the president of the United States right now.
He
Make
is.
no bones about that.
So Governor Robin Hood wants to take some of that excess sales tax revenue, and instead of addressing issues across the state that affect everyone, she wants to, in the Christmas spirit, hand out that money to the people that paid the least amount of that sales tax and were affected the least. So what are your thoughts on Governor Robin Hood?
So she's going to give out $300 up to $100 if you earn up to $150,000, and then families would get $500. So I didn't hear the exact specifics. So if each person gets $300, I don't know the exact mathematics, but what she needs to know is that Medicaid is in a $4 billion hole.
Not to mention that and this is a favorite topic here on Eye On Sullivan, community colleges, ours in particular, is in an $8 million hole caused by the state.
Well, the reason why I mentioned Medicaid was because Sullivan County is the highest user of Medicaid, per person on average across the state of New York, and I don't know why we wouldn't shore that up instead of, and the funny thing is the exact way, and I mean, all you had to do was watch one newscast and they explained it. The reason we got into this inflationary nightmare is because of, during COVID when they handed out those checks. Now she's going to hand out more checks. It's going to do nothing for the economy, but it's going to create more inflation.
It's going to create more inflation. When the government cannot make wealth, the government is like a pool circulator. The water can keep flowing into the pool, but the pool never overflows because it goes right out the main drain.
I mean, the bottom line is there's too many dollars chasing too few goods. And that is the exact definition.
So it is budget season, and
Yes.
I believe that coming up in a couple of days, the county is going to vote on a budget.
They have to the 27th of this month.
Right. So it's
there's a meeting tonight. There's a budgetary meeting.
a budget
tonight.
hearing tonight.
Correct.
Right. So I thought it would be a good idea today, since over the last 4 years, you and our guest shepherded the budget process through, and it was a very unique 4 years because for the first time in even Nancy Buck's memory, we didn't borrow any money. We didn't have any real debt to pay off.
Not only that, we paid off $26 million ahead of schedule.
And we didn't see significant county tax increases.
No, there was not.
So-
My prediction is by next year, when they raise the taxes again next year, they'll have raised the taxes more in 2 years than we did in 4 years.
And I think that's the platform they ran on.
That is correct.
So we're very fortunate today to have the person that was your right hand in terms of the legislative role in the budget, and that's the principal role of the legislature,
Let me tell you something. When, I had met George during the campaign of 2019, and we spoke, in depth about budgets and, fiscal conservatism. and you can be, you know, a liberal person, still be fiscally conservative. And we had a lot of conversations about our vision of where we saw the county to go in, and you know, so as chair, you get to hand out the committee chairs. You get to make up, and oddly enough, the way it's set up is, as chairman, you say who's on what committee. There is there's no one that can say, I think that's wrong. You should do it this way. No, you have complete carte blanche on how to do that.
That's one of the very few functions that the chair has exclusive authority,
Correct.
is to set up the committees. And we'll talk more about, as the day goes on, about how important that committee structure is, not only at the county level, but at the state level and, of course, at the federal
Sure.
level.
So the one thing that I had no doubt about was that, you know, George was going to be the chairman of management and budget. There was no doubt in my mind. He was uniquely qualified. He really understood the process. He enjoyed the process. He was very good at it. He worked hard at it on a continual basis. And, you know, the bottom line is, you know, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, the results were the best 4 years consecutively that fiscally speaking, that this county's ever had.
So again, your administration came in.
Yeah.
You used George Conklin, who had been the supervisor of the town of Fremont for several years,
Correct.
and ran a pretty conservative budget up there.
Yeah.
You
Well, they had to. Their levy was less than $1 million.
Sure. You put him in charge of the Management and Budget Committee.
Correct.
And the 4-year result was a substantial increase in fund balance.
Correct.
A substantial decrease in our debt
Well, so the fund balance went from $14 million to $82 million
in 4
in
years.
4 years.
For the first time in 50 years, the county was deemed by the state comptroller's office to be financially stable.
Well, they could only go back 50 years, but there was no other time that the county was stable. There's only 3 counties as of last year that were stable in the state of New York, the 62 counties.
And the tax levies over 4 years, what's the total tax increase we saw in 4 years?
I'd have to look that up, but I could look it up pretty
Okay.
quickly.
I know it was flat a couple of years.
Yeah, it was negative 1 year.
Right. Right.
It was negative 1 year, and then the other years it was pretty low. Well, the last year the taxes went up. That is a bone of contention of mine to this very day. But I've forgiven my friends over that.
Right. So with that, let's bring in the former legislator for District 5, the former supervisor of the town of Fremont, and the person who chaired the Management and Budget Committee and guided it through arguably the most successful fiscal period this county has seen, certainly since the legislative system came in. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome to Eye On Sullivan, George Conklin. George, can you hear us?
Yes, sir, I can. Thank you for that very gracious introduction.
So, George, you were the person that chaired the Management and Budget Committee, and although we have staff, they have staff at the county, headed up by our county manager, Josh Potosik, that primarily put pen to paper. But why don't you help us out with understanding the role of your Management and Budget Committee in the budget process?
Well, there's many different ways you could look at it. There's folks who've come in who have been reactive or gone with the flow, or you can be proactive.
Okay,
I would love to. I'm sorry?
No, I would say, why don't we start from the beginning? So, as a former employee of the county, I know that in June or July we would receive our budget worksheets where we would have to put in our requests for the following year. And then all of those went over to the Office of Management and Budget. And I think that's for the first time where you, as a legislator, has an opportunity to meet with Josh and his staff. And what are you looking for when you're taking all of those requests? It's like getting all the children's Christmas lists from Santa, and we all know Santa can't fulfill everything. There's only so much room in the sled. So what are you looking for?
Very well put. Well, let's face it. The budget timeline is basically, it's an 11-month, really 12-month. It's a year-round process. As you intimated about June, July, when the department heads put in their wish lists, if you're proactive, you're meeting with at least the departments that you deal with, and then management and budget. It's the entire county, and you're talking to OMB about,
and that's the Office of Management and Budget.
Office of Management and Budget. Who's asking for what, and is there anything alarming, out of control, over the top? And if there is, why is that? And then you investigate it. And you say, oh, geez, this, DPW's asking for buildings for, $2.5 million. Oh, geez, what? And then you go and you speak to them and you say, hey, why is this? Oh, okay, we need a new roof. We need this, we need that. It's a matter of, as Rob loves to say, doing your homework and looking into why these folks are asking for what they're asking for, and you compare from the year before to 5 years before, because we all have that in our budgets. You get the 5-year look back, and you do your homework, and you go and you look, and if there's something glaringly over the top, well, you go and investigate it.
So,
and then, I'm sorry.
No. So, I was going to say, people have heard the term zero-based budget. Is that a policy that you encouraged with the staff to be looking at it from a zero-based budget? Or, obviously we know we have the biggest expense to the county is employment.
Correct.
And that's not really zero-based anymore because we've negotiated contracts and you've got salaries to pay. So, Rob, as the chairman of the legislature, and what I want to do is I want to try to bring our listeners behind the scenes, so to speak, because they're all, too many of them are there on game day, but an awful lot of work goes on that doesn't happen on Thursday mornings. Now, there are some people that believe the county only functions on Thursday mornings.
The funny thing about that is, and I've told this to you and to George 1,000 times, I see Thursday as a legislature as a fait accompli. Like my job is done, by the time we get to Thursday, because we've already gone over the resolutions, we've gone over all the work, So pertaining to the budget, just real quick, the one thing I do want to say about the budget is, as a legislator in Sullivan County, it is your number one responsibility as a legislator. The fact that people, everyone's given a hard copy. And people would walk into their office and throw it on their desk, and it would sit there for 4 years, literally in the same exact spot.
Well, we actually saw legislators give their one copy away.
That is correct. Because they had no intention of reading it. It is your number one responsibility, the finances of this county. If let's say you're pro law enforcement, or you're pro, DPW, or whatever you're pro, and you want to, extend programs or hire more people, you better know what the budget says. Because if you don't have the money, how do you go about it? To pass a bond, you have to get other people involved in the game. So if you're not doing that, one of the things, I really always appreciate about George Conklin was that he would come in on Tuesdays and he would spend the whole day talking to people in management and budget, go down to the treasurer's office. It's a guess on where sales tax is going to be, but you still need to have that conversation.
Now, why is that important, where sales tax is going to be in terms of the budget in a county like Sullivan?
Well, Sullivan County is a sales tax-based economy. That's the bottom line. We generate sales tax through many items. While we were in office, the number one was car sales. People used to say all the time, "Oh, tourism, tourism, tourism." That's not. It's actually the fourth largest, and it's only a small part of it. Because if you think about it, everyone here that lives here, all 78,000 people, go to work, church, and home every day already, and they heat their homes. When most of the when most of the sales tax is coming in, it's coming in during the warmer months. But when you heated your home, and I mean, you got your $1,000 bill to heat your home. I mean, that's part of the sales tax game. The other thing is a lot of the people who come visit here belong to religious communities, and they're not coming here for tourism, right? That's not what they're here for. They're here to get away from the city and all that stuff. I understand that, but they're not here for tourism, and no ad on the side of a bus in New York City is going to bring them here. But the point being is that no
influencers that are bringing them here.
No, very few. So understanding how how we generate money, to pay our bills, understanding the levy, and I say this all the time. If you lined up 50 people, elected officials in this county, and you asked them what the county levy is, elected officials, I think maybe one or two would get it right. Now, I've said it in conversation to some elected officials, so maybe they retained it. I don't know the answer. So part of the budget process is understanding how you get your money. Right?
Now, the levy, just so that our listeners are clear, the levy is the post-Christmas card that we all get.
Correct.
Right before New Year's Eve.
Correct.
January 1st.
That's right.
January 1st. That's your tax bill. Oddly enough, it's about $74 million. I haven't looked at this year's budget in detail to get to that part. I was looking at other stuff. And there's grants and there's other things. But the lion's share of it comes from sales tax and from the levy.
So the levy is $74 million, and this I think is a good place. And then I want to come back to George and continue going through the process. Mm-hmm. The total budget, we don't have it in front of us this year's, but generally in the last couple of years has been what?
Well, this year's $301 million.
$301 million.
Yeah, that's the first time we cracked 300.
And last year was well under $300 million.
Yeah, it was 285. I think.
Yeah. Okay. So out of $301 million, only $74 million comes from our property tax bill.
That's correct.
All right. So, George, to come back to where we were, so all of the department heads put in their wish list, and of course each department head has different legislators that are responsible for different committees, and they too may make their wishes known if it's something out of the ordinary. And then a proposed budget is put together by the Office of Management and Budget, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then explain how it comes about that different commissioners or department heads have an opportunity to make a presentation before the county legislature, because not all department heads do have that opportunity, but certainly the larger departments do. Let's talk about how those, what we call budget hearings, get set up.
Okay. I had some of the first ones in my first couple of years as management and budget. But if I could just go back just a bit back on what Rob said.
Sure.
In our current budget, I've been studying it pretty closely. I feel like I'm on the job again. The sales tax is estimated at $80 million. The tax levy is 70. It's closer to 75 than 74. So I just want to put in that sales tax has eclipsed property tax as funding of our budget, which had not happened until I believe last year.
Correct.
That is pretty significant And I believe our current legislature and our current governing body should be looking at that, because that's something you need to keep going. The sales tax is a user tax, and it takes the burden off of the landowners, which is huge. I'll get off that stump now and go back to what your question was, Mike.
You're preaching to the choir on that one, George.
You know, it's such an
amen,
important point. Such an important point that you raised, George, because one of the real impediments to true economic development in this county is that the property owners were bearing too high a burden in terms of funding and operating the county.
Correct.
And partially because of the programs and the leadership that we had from 20 to 24, sales tax has flourished and has now eclipsed, which means that visitors to our county and those of us that live here in smaller increments than writing a $8,000-$10,000 check in January are bearing a good part of the burden of operating the county, which is terrific, and we need to keep that going. And just to be clear, because we heard it so frequently over the last 4 years, this is not taking a shot at anyone, but that's not really attributed to tourism.
No.
That's, as Rob pointed out, and as I heard him point out over and over again over the last 4 years, that's really a function of the people that live here, that have second homes here, that are buying fuel oil here and cars here and airplanes here.
Correct.
Those are the people that are covering that.
So building materials have become the number one item to generate sales tax.
Yes.
Which means that there's a huge growth period going on in our county, and that has to be looked at also as you're figuring out your budget. How are the roads? The sheriff's department. Those are the two biggest. The DPW and the sheriff's department are the two biggest. Users of the funds. We have to make sure that we have enough.
Amen.
I mean, we have to have enough.
And they should be.
And they should be. And we have to have enough. We want to be a safe county. We want to have good roads. I mean, if George, I named him. So when you're chairman, there's a reorg halfway through your term, and you either get reelected as chairman or you don't. In our county, I believe anyone that's tried to get reelected has gotten reelected as chairman. And when you do that, you get to redo the committees. And I had put George head of DPW for many reasons. And one of the reasons was, as a town supervisor, he really understood road construction and the cost of that and why that's important to the county, particularly on the western side when there's less county roads. And, there's more county roads and there's more, your main way of getting anywhere is a county road. Is less state roads out that way. It's more county roads. And then you also, a lot of that work was being neglected because they were overspending their revenues. And
that's the legislature, not DPW.
That's the legislature. And then culvert boxes and the sides of the roads were being neglected over time. And I felt that putting George in charge of that would correct some of those problems. And, Well,
there's also a natural synergy there, because if George is going to spearhead the budget process,
correct.
It makes a lot of sense to have George also be working with one of the bigger departments that has the most direct impact on the citizens and visitors to our county.
Correct.
Obviously, the sheriff's office keeps the streets safe. But DPW keeps the streets passable, which is what drives sales tax revenue. It drives people literally to the stores, children to school, safe roads. And I remember in 2022, when you had the reorg, the prior years, the budget contained zero money for roads.
For road construction.
Correct.
So it was not paving. It was for everything else that goes into a road, right? Prepping the road for the next year, the culvert boxes so the roads don't get flooded, bridges. There's hundreds of bridges in this county that people don't understand.
So paving a road is the end of the
Correct.
process. The
Correct.
year before, we were instructed by our commissioner, Ed McAndrew, who the county's very fortunate to have somebody
fortunate.
like him, and his staff is terrific as
Oh
well.
my God.
And Mark does an excellent job too.
Mark does a great job. You
Yep.
know, he likes to deal.
Good
he deals
people.
with the trash.
Yeah.
Kristen is fantastic as the county's
correct.
architect. But George explained to us that you can't just go buy more blacktop. These roads have to be prepared. The important thing is that George understood that because he was a town supervisor in a town that had a very tight budget, but still had to maintain roads and still had to clean those roads and prepare them. So I want to go back to 2022 where the county, in the initial budget run-through, appropriated no money for roads, but they did ultimately spend money on roads. How did that happen?
You asking me or you asking George?
Well,
Well,
either you or
you're
George.
talking about. Well, you're talking about Bonnie, and I think you have the timeline wrong. 2022, I think 2019 or 20, they did that.
Right.
I believe we had appropriated.
No, that's correct. That's correct. It was 2022 when we had the discussion about
Yes.
getting them back on track with the number of miles a year
Yes.
that Ed wanted to do.
So
Yes,
16,
because you're
17,
300
18, go ahead, George.
Go, George.
So, okay, 17. Please let me go, Rob, because I studied this all day, so I wouldn't screw it up.
Perfect.
And here you are now.
There's there's 380 miles of county road, and the bridges. I forget. There's a bunch.
In the hundreds.
But there's a thing called Consolidated Highway Projects. It's CHIPS money that we get appropriated from New York State. It runs, I don't know, 3.5, 3.6 million, somewhere in there. The commissioner of Public Works needs about 10 million a year, 13 million a year to keep up on redoing the roads so that he's doing a tenth of the roads every year. So you're looking at 15 miles of road. And he had explained that, and it made perfect sense to us.
It's 28 to 32 miles of road. That'd be 10%.
Yes, 28 to 30. Yes. My math is sorry, but yes. And he, intimated. He said, "Yeah, I got to do that 30, 35 miles if I can." So we did what we could to appropriate those monies because, let's face it, our founding fathers. Well, that's going back too far, but government basically is meant to make sure we have safe streets, as you said, Mr. McGuire, and good passable roads. After that, in my eyes, it's fluff.
Yeah.
There are other responsibilities, but those are the two things I campaigned on when I ran and what I always believed in, and I still believe in. You have to have good roads. You have to have safe streets. So Public Works and Police Department is where your money's supposed to go. So we funneled that money there, and we did the right thing. I remember Mr. McAndrew coming to me when I took over as chairman of Public Works, and he said, "Geez, I've been trying to do this thing on South Main on Monticello for 20 years.
East Main. East Main Street.
Yeah, in East Main Street. Yeah, it was 23 years.
23 years.
He was trying to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I went down there. It was like a Bosnian minefield.
It was.
And then I counted. I went down. I literally counted. I think there were 56 businesses down there.
Right.
I went up and down. I said, "Oh my, this is crazy." I went into the manager's office as the chairman of management and budget, and this is going back to what Mr. McGuire intimated. It was a perfect synergy because I went in. I said, "Listen, I know this money's here." He was not happy with me, but guess what? A year later, the project was done, and the county seat of Monticello has a main street that is passable. I mean, this shouldn't be rocket science. This shouldn't be something that you have to struggle for.
Well, it's funny that you say that because the village of Monticello was supposed to give us a share of that money because it is happening in
Oh,
the
yes.
village of Monticello.
Yes,
Well, and
yes,
part
yes.
of the road
And they
is
didn't
a
have the
village
money.
road, and
Yeah,
part of the road's a county road.
Correct.
So the village is responsible for maintaining their roads.
Correct.
And, well, Rob, why don't you
Yeah.
bring our listeners up to speed on how that went when we're ready to get this job done and the village said,
Yeah, so the village then turns around, and it's talked about for years to the buildup of doing this project. And, we kept saying, you need this much money to do this project. You need this much money to do the project. And if it goes over, we'll pick up the difference, because...
and they get CHIPS money also,
And
just
they
to
get
be
CHIPS
clear.
money also. Correct. And so we're going back and forth, and Josh is negotiating not negotiating, but keeping the former mayor of Monticello in the loop. And, it's a constant weekly update. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. So now it all comes down to the state's going to put in X amount of money, the county's going to put in X amount of money, and the village is going to put in X amount of money. And the village says, I have no money. You have to lend it to me. We're like, what? So, oh, wow. Remember that day?
I believe I told you you should take their police station for your office.
Yeah. So Ed is, Mr. McAndrew obviously is devastated because he thinks that this project's now not going to happen. And so he comes to see George and I. He's like, I've been waiting 23 years to do this project. We're right here, and their money was, so I believe they have a $10 million, $9 million budget,
Right.
And they needed to come up, with several $100,000.
700,000, I think, was the number.
Yeah. And they were like, we have no money,
And they had 23 years to come up with 700,000.
They're like, we have no money and we cannot bond for anything. We're like, well, how about this year's CHIPS money? Well, we got to do this road and that road. So then, I remember that day, George and I, we went to lunch that day, and we were talking about it, obviously, because it's a big deal. Because, if you go down the road now and see how nice it is there, how could you not do this road?
Well, it's one of the two major gateways to the village of Monticello, which is the county seat.
Correct.
I mean, you come in from the north and west from 17B
Yeah.
and down Jefferson Street,
Yeah.
which we practiced digging up a couple of times to
Several
connect water
times.
to the jail.
That was not us. It was the guys before us.
That's correct. And then there's East Broadway, where anyone coming from the casino, anybody coming from Mamakating or Orange County, that's how they enter the county seat. And I mean, George classified it nicely. I mean, it was you needed a body shop by the time you got to the top of East Broadway. It was so bad.
Yeah, it was a little brutal. So we moved. Luckily, and this is the funny part about it, is that we were in such a good financial position at the time. In our caucus, we discuss it and we say, do we want to move forward? Now, keep in mind, none of us have that as a district. Okay, and so Alan Sorensen had that as part of his district. And so Alan used to be the planner when for the county. So he was part of the mix that had the dream of actually having passable roads in the county seat. You look back at this, it's almost humorous to me.
Well, and the interesting thing is that there's very few. Well, then there was very few residences on that stretch of road. There was lots of businesses. Now there's quite a few.
Now it's flourishing.
Right.
And that's the importance of having quality roads and why you should have the money available to do them. So that we decided, as a caucus, that we were going to move forward on this. And, so we lent Monticello, the village of Monticello, the money. Amongst us, we pretty much wrote the money off because I believe they have a $9 million. They have a $10 million budget and $9 million deficit, and I believe they're gonna even up this year where they'll have a $10 million budget and a $10 million deficit. So I don't see them paying us back anytime soon. But you do have a beautiful road with beautiful sidewalks, and if you go there now, it's very nice and it's booming. It's absolutely booming.
You even have a sidewalk to nowhere. Well, it's not really a sidewalk to nowhere. If anybody needed to walk down to get themselves washed or their oil changed in themselves, they could walk down to the oil change place.
Correct.
But it goes all the way down there.
Correct. Yeah, it goes all the way down to Rose Valley Road, I believe.
All right. And George, we had a little bit of technical difficulties, which rarely happens with the crew that we have here. They are truly on top of their game, but I think we have George back again.
Yes, you do.
All right, terrific. So we were just finishing up reminiscing about the process of fulfilling Ed McAndrew's 23-year dream or nightmare of getting East Broadway done. And ultimately, the county, because of the fiscal responsibility that was realized and practiced by the prior administration, the money was available, and it no longer was an impediment that the village was on more difficult financial times, and the county was able to get that project done. And we'll all wait for the day when the village is able to pay the county back.
It's going to be
It's going to be a while. Okay, so the other point that I want to make is I think that George and Rob have appropriately talked about how safe roads for driving on or walking on, if it's sidewalks, are fundamental to the role of a county legislature.
Well, the funny thing you say that is one of the things that I really wanted to do was partner with villages.
Sure.
And there's 8 villages in our county, and create, where you could ride bikes in the villages, right? And you could move around. And it wasn't some, save the world type philosophy. It was just to get people moving around. Commerce happens when people are moving around.
Well, and we are 61 in the health rankings, and I remember the chairman setting a priority that every department would look to those health rankings and see what they could do. So there's Public Works in the streets. Let's make them safe for bicycles. A lot of our summer visitors like to ride.
Correct.
It's a great activity. And literally every department under the leadership of your administration was asked to look at what you do and look at what we can do to try to address those health rankings. So we've addressed the roads, and the point that I've been wanting to address is that prior legislatures didn't budget money for the roads. They got the CHIPS money, and then they bonded for roads. So it'd be like somebody taking out a loan to pay their rent because they wanted to buy a new car and go on a couple of Disney vacations.
That is exactly what happened.
Like the most important thing that we do are safe roads and safe streets being the acronym for what the sheriff's department and law enforcement, not just the sheriff's department, but law enforcement in general takes care of. And then safe roads are, what we're driving on, what our children, our school buses are on. And they were bonding for roads. How did that come about, George?
Well, that's a very unfortunate situation where I think we have the capital plan, which looks ahead 5 years, and then some. And if you don't look ahead through your finances, like Rob said, I used to ask about the sales tax all the time, your revenues, then all of a sudden you get caught with your pants down, and oh no, what do we do? And unfortunately, sometimes they cut from the wrong places, and the roads should never be somewhere you cut from. I believe it's a fear of mine with the adult care center that in Josh's budget analysis, if they don't turn it to a private company, there'll be a 9% increase in taxes and a $10 million shortfall in the following year's budget for infrastructure.
Now, keep in mind, this is on a levy of $75 million.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, think about that for a second. What people don't understand is, and I used to say this ad nauseum. I'm probably not in office because I used to fight this fight every chance every time it came to me, I fought the fight, is you must go through the budgetary process. So let's say, the district attorney says, I need another investigator. And my response would be, okay, you're asked to hand in your budget around June or July. We discuss it. You're one of the larger departments. We'll have you come to the legislature and you state your case on why. No, I need that person today. And then we would get into a little, scuffle over it because I'm trying to keep everyone to the process. People would ask for stipends for people. So this is a negotiated salary. And then you put it in the budget. And then they would come back and say, and we're not talking $1,000. We're talking $10,000, $15,000 stipends. You're looking around like, how do you justify that? And very seldom it was. I got into scuffles with people from my own party who held office because I said we have to go through the process.
Well, and just to be clear about it, as George pointed out a little bit ago, the budget process is really a year-round process.
Correct.
You never really aren't in the budget process.
Oh, absolutely.
But what's important is if somebody comes to you, let's use Public Works because we're picking on Ed today because he does such a good job, and he says he needs a new truck. You're not saying you don't need the truck or we don't think you're important enough or we don't like the work you're doing. You're saying when we pass that $300 million budget, you can't come in and say, I need another $250,000
Correct.
because we've already made decisions based on a $300 million budget, and we just can't be spending another couple of million or more if each department head says, the budget process doesn't affect me. I'm going to come in February and ask for raises for my whole staff. They may well deserve it, but there has to be a budget process.
There has to be a budget process.
So the department heads hand in their budgets. We know we've got a goal about $300 million. Josh knows that when he starts where he wants to be because the legislature directs him. We're not going to exceed the cap, which is about 2%, or we want to stay flat. So he knows the money he's got. And then the requests come in, and let's say it's $400 million. Mm-hmm. So, George, how do you prioritize? Because everybody's got good ideas. Everybody could use some more help. If you're doing well with 3 trucks, 5 trucks, maybe you can do better. So, George, you were a supervisor of a small but successful town. How do you make those decisions?
Well, if you do your job, it's very, very difficult to do the right thing. And you have to start with your priorities. It's just like every homeowner does. What do I need? I need heat. I need to feed my children. I need a roof over my head. I need a vehicle to go to work. What do those things cost me? And I'm oversimplifying, but then you take those things and you put them on paper and you say, this is what I need. What is left over? And then what's left over is what goes to the other things. And in government, everybody's important. Everything's important. But as a common sense conservative raised by a single mother, I have understood what is important. You have to have certain key ingredients to make things run. And there are lots of things that people think are important that probably are to a lot of people, but you have to focus on your core. You have to have passable roads. You have to have safe streets. And then your interior government obviously has to run. I don't even want to venture into the land minefield of what's not important because that could start about 10 more podcasts.
Absolutely.
But that's how you have to look at it. And it's very difficult in the town of Fremont comparative to Sullivan County. Oh, my God, you want to talk about, one of the smallest budgets? But I had some tough decisions. I made enemies over it. But 75% of the town of Fremont budget went to the highway.
Right.
The rest of it went to administrative costs. Myself and the building inspector, 12 years ago, we finished the addition that we put on the back of the building because the town clerk was working out of his garage and had retired, and we had to make a town clerk's office. So we had a shell built, and we went in there and we general contracted what needed to be done, and then physically finished it.
And today, I'm sure
You
there
know,
would be
I'm
many that
oversimplifying.
would. I'm sure there would be many today that would say there was a conflict of interest, and you were corrupt, and you were stealing money. Meanwhile,
yeah.
you were donating the time.
Yeah, no, we nobody got paid, you know. But the point being, I'm oversimplifying, but you can take those principles to county government, state government, federal government.
No question.
The larger the government entity, the larger the pot of gold, the easier it is to have it dispersed, and everybody's important, and you have to take a hard line, and you have to go and say, listen, you know, this is what's important, and you start at the top, and you say, this is what's important. These are necessitative.
I mean, so
And anything that's not necessitative, then you start whacking away.
So I mean, that's the whole concept behind Doge right now, right?
Correct.
So Doge is being created by two very intelligent people to go through, you know, I couldn't even imagine a multi-trillion-dollar budget and, you know, start breaking it down like, you know, we are wasting money, okay? You know, I remember one time we were talking to a person who receives money from the county, an organization, and he was an accountant himself by trade. And, you know, we were talking budgetary items, and he says, you know, municipal budgets are a totally different animal because most people don't understand is that there's buckets of money. So you may take in money for one thing, but you can't use it here, here, or here. You get a grant or you get something else, and you can't use it on that, or you can't use it on this, or it's earmarked exactly for a certain thing. So you have to figure that out, and that's why Josh is as good as Josh is. I think he's on his 9th award in a row of putting together a budget.
He is amazing.
Yeah, the county's very fortunate to have him. So we've got just a couple minutes left, and I really want to touch on this topic and get George's comments on it and Rob's, because they confronted it literally every Thursday when those magical words of public comment, I'd pull the catcher's gear down and we'd be ready to go.
Yeah.
When Rob and George left office, there was about an $82 million surplus in the
Correct.
operating fund.
So we build it from $14 million to $82
All right.
million.
So seems pretty easy to balance the budget then. We've got $82 million sitting there. Why don't we just do an extra $82 million worth of spending, and we don't have to tax anybody because we have the money already? Why not just do that?
Well, the comptroller's office, there's a state comptroller's office. The recommendation is 2 months operating expenses, which for Sullivan County, I believe is, I think it's $16 or $20 million operating, because you have your tax roll coming in January, February, March, and we don't get the $74 million that we get in the tax rolls. Then you have flooding, you have unanticipated things, and for the first time in my recent memory, the last few years, you can get 4 or 5% on your money.
Correct.
So now,
right.
Instead of paying interest, you're making interest.
Correct.
So I can see where you're going to go to a zero budget, a zero
Increase.
increase, but a zero surplus, because something comes up now, you got to bond again. like the roads. Like, a bridge goes out. The county had an issue with a flooding situation with as funny as it is, the Taxpayers' Burden Bridge in Lumberland.
It's in Highland. Taxpayers'
Highland.
Taxpayers' Pond.
Right.
Yeah. So, like, things come up. You do need to have a certain amount of a surplus. And, I mean, in a perfect world, in any human being's life, obviously government and business, personal life are different. You get to a point where you have no debt and you have enough money that you can live off the interest. In a government situation, that's not legal, and it's not. But if you can kind of blend the two together, where you're not bonding or borrowing, and you have monies, because that money that Rob spoke about is not all unencumbered. There's many different. There's encumbered. There's unencumbered. There's monies that are there. There's $20 million of that is for what you guys put together as a sports center for kids at the college.
Right. Well, that's
$20 million of that. So there's certain parts of it that are earmarked, and everybody doesn't understand that. It's not free money. It's not just hanging out there. And like I said, there's a certain amount that when the auditors come, they lay it out.
Sure.
And,
Rob,
and they'll say, listen, you need this one.
Rob, why not spend down the fund balance to reduce taxes in a given year?
Because that's crazy talk. Because you can manage properly, and I believe in our terms. So in our first year, I think we had. I'll tell you exactly if you give me 2 seconds here. I'll pull it up. We had our tax
I was just looking for it.
Was 2.24 our freshman year in there. Now keep in mind that was a COVID year.
Mm-hmm.
We were unsure how things were going to go. Sales tax did take a huge hit that year, but then the next year we're at 1.45. Which is quite low.
Increase.
Tax increase. But keep in mind, we're not bonding a dime either.
Right.
We're actually paying debt down while we're doing this. The following year, it was negative, and we had taken off, the garbage tax the same year,
And the electric tax.
and the electric tax. Otherwise, it would have been more negative, believe it or not. So we were negative the next year, and then our last year, there's a bone of contention with me, but it was 0.15. It should have been flat, but we are where we are. So we had, 2.24. We had 1.4, a 1.5, and a negative. That was our 4-year tally.
All under the tax cap.
All under the tax cap. We were well below the tax cap. It wasn't like we went to the tax cap. This legislature this year went to the tax cap. And has spent down a considerable amount of it. So the reason why you don't do it is you don't have to if you manage your money properly. It's just, understanding the budget, understanding a lot of our money goes out. I know this is going to be shocking to people, over political reasons. You have these things where they're like, oh, we've always done it that way. And I'm like, what? That's crazy to me. And we would have these discussions. And, I would rail against things that, this guy got this much stipend for this, and then that person's no longer in the job, and we want to keep the stipend there. I'm like, why are we keeping the stipend there? The new person's not doing the job that the old person was doing. It should go back to the original salary. And we would have these arguments all the time. The advantage I had was I knew how to read a budget. 2,
You had an interest in reading a budget.
I had a ton of interest in it. I had George, in my caucus that we could bounce things off of. I had a very open relationship with Josh Potosik, who is fantastic at budgets. He's won 9 awards in a row. I'm sure he'll win his 10th in a row. And so we would have open conversations. And let me tell you, even though we were in this, George and I are in the same party, we always didn't agree. That's the funny thing about it. When we would sit up there, on Thursdays, people would say, oh, you guys agree on everything. I said, You see us agreeing on everything. Yeah.
You can watch a couples in an ice figure skating,
Yeah,
but trust me,
Correct.
2 months before when they were learning the routine, not so choreographed.
Not so much. Yeah, it was. There was a lot of hang-ups, and I'm never talking to that guy again, and it wasn't always pretty, but as adults, you work it out, and I mean, one of the things that we took the politics out of a lot of this stuff. So one of the things that we didn't do, that everyone else does do, we never horse traded votes. So we didn't say, okay, I'll give you this if you give me this. Okay, we never did that. We didn't do it one time, not on one item. And I think that for your budgetary purposes, you're not overspending because you don't have to promise someone something else to get what you want. You let everything rise and fall on its own, and it becomes a much better budgetary process.
Well, let's not forget also that if you spend $50-60 million of fund balance to put a bunch of pork into your budget this year, guess what? Next year, where's that $50-60 million coming from? Because you're not replenishing the fund balance in 1 year in a county like Sullivan. So where's that? How do you continue that program or those positions?
Oh, you start raising taxes.
You got to raise taxes, and that's where you see these ridiculous tax increases. George?
It's a snowball rolling downhill, and it only gets bigger and bigger and bigger. What we have right now, which the stage was set by Rob and company, and listen, in all this, I feel like I would be amiss if I didn't give accolades to the county treasurer, Nancy Buck, who has the purse strings and has done prudent things with the money, but we have a snowball going the other way, uphill, getting smaller, which would be our debt services. When you have money that you're getting interest on, which I can tell you, town of Fremont, I remember in the budget, the interest on monies in your revenue side was laughable. 0.01%, oh my word. But at the county level, when you have millions of dollars like that, you have a few bucks. It's nothing astronomical, but it's something. And it's better than paying out interest. When you look at the yin and the yang of it, when you're paying out annually $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 instead of getting $200,000, $300,000 maybe, that's a big turn. I think in our budget now, $1 million is 2 million is 1%. Yeah. So every $2 million is a percent of savings to the taxpayer.
One of the things I want to point out about Nancy Buck that, so George and I would be down that office every day, and we would, one of the things that Nancy Buck did was she let, and you don't have to do this as an elected official, it's her office, okay? She would let us go and ask questions of the people that were in charge of certain sectors of the county, okay, under her office. Not a lot of people do that, okay? They don't want, other elected officials in their business.
Well, they get very territorial.
Correct.
And that's not to the county's benefit.
Correct. And Nancy Buck understood that. So when people were going down there, so when George and I would go down there and ask questions of Shannon Ambrose, of Kathleen Lara and other people, Nancy had instructed them answer their questions. And so then you have a better understanding of where you're at so that you could make better decisions. To sit there and have never cracked your budget open and then start making decisions is insanity to me. Last year's budget went, I believe it went 7-2. And the current chairman, and this is why we're in the position we're in financially, said, I think it's a mistake not to raise taxes more. A flat budget doesn't help anybody.
That's exactly what she said. And You know, folks, we can go on, especially with having George and Rob here, because they lived this for 4 years. I mean, George would amaze me. It'd be like, you know, sitting at a restaurant and having someone be able to name the starting lineup of the 64 Mets or something. George knew that budget back and front. He could question people on certain things, and it's been such a pleasure to have them here, have George here today, and have Rob here today. And hopefully, folks, we were able to give you a little bit better insight into how this process happens. And I can assure you, it doesn't only happen on Thursday mornings for 2 hours. These are two people that worked more than full-time to put this budget together. And so hopefully, folks, you enjoyed this episode of Eye On Sullivan. We are available at email at eyeonsullivan@gmail.com. You want to drop us a line, let us know what you think of the podcast. Let us know what guests or what issues you want us to take up, because this podcast is really about you and the people, places, and events that affect everyone in Sullivan County. And on behalf of Rob Doherty, the chairman, I want to thank George not only for joining us today, but also for the outstanding work and commitment that he has had to his community and our community over a number of years. We'll be back next week with another episode of Eye On Sullivan. I want to thank our staff here at the beautiful Bowl Gold Studios for the work that they do. And George, thank you again very much for joining us, and hopefully you'll come back again maybe in January and talk about the budget that was passed. Rob?
Yeah. So again, I hope that does give you a better insight. It's not a one-off thing. It's not just Josh putting together the budget, even though he does an excellent job. The legislators, when involved, can get you a better budget and have your taxes lower. I mean, that's the bottom line. When they don't engage, that's when costs get out of control.
George, you got about 6 seconds, George. Any last-minute wisdom?
I thank you for having me on, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you, gentlemen.
Very good. Once again, on behalf of Rob Doherty, this is Mike McGuire thanking you for joining us for Eye On Sullivan. Be sure to drop us a line. Let us know what you think of the podcast at eyeonsullivan@gmail.com. Thanks, folks. We'll talk to you next week.